Malcolm Reed had swept the same warehouse floor for 9 years, without once being invited to stand in a company photo. So when billionaire owner Victor Hale arrived with cameras, investors, and the mayor to celebrate the new automated food distribution center, nobody expected Malcolm to walk past security, pull the red lockout tag from his pocket, and shut the main conveyor down with 3 trucks waiting at the dock. Victor saw a janitor in a faded gray uniform humiliating him in front of the city. He saw spoiled food, broken promises, and a man risking thousands of families' deliveries for reasons that looked personal. But Malcolm had noticed one thing nobody in a suit had bent low enough to see: fresh silver dust under the base of aisle 7. And if he was wrong, he would lose the job that paid for his father's care, his apartment, and the last piece of dignity he still had. If he was right, the most celebrated warehouse in the state was one heavy pallet away from burying people who had names the cameras never learned. The red tag hung from Malcolm's hand like a small flag nobody wanted to salute. The whole warehouse changed sound when the conveyor stopped. Not silent. Warehouses are never silent. The ceiling fans still turned. The dock plates still groaned under idling trailers. Forklifts beeped in the far lanes. A refrigeration unit hummed behind the insulated doors where crates of yogurt, milk, and produce waited for routes to shelters, schools, clinics, and church pantries across 3 counties. But the main line had a rhythm, and Malcolm had broken it. The belt had been moving all morning, carrying sealed food totes past scanners, scales, label printers, and a row of polished robotic arms that Victor Hale's company had advertised as the future of hunger relief logistics. It was supposed to be a beautiful day, a clean day. A day for speeches about efficiency and compassion and the power of private innovation to feed public need. Then a man with a dustpan clipped to his cart stepped into the emergency stop zone and did the one thing everybody had been trained to say only a supervisor could authorize. He stopped the line. At the front of the warehouse, beside a temporary stage built from black risers, Victor Hale lowered his smile 1 inch at a time. He was 58 years old, founder of Hale Harvest Systems, a logistics billionaire who had made his fortune moving groceries faster than anyone else in America. His company owned cold storage centers, food routing software, last-mile vans, packaging plants, and now, through a foundation arm, this gleaming regional food hub that would handle donated groceries and government-funded meal boxes for families who could not always get to a supermarket. Victor liked projects with measurable outcomes: pounds distributed, miles reduced, waste avoided, children served. He did not like disorder. He especially did not like disorder while 3 local news cameras were pointed at him, and the mayor stood under a banner that read, "Food moves faster when we move together." "Who did that?" Victor asked. No one answered at first, then every head turned toward Malcolm. Malcolm stood near the yellow safety rail, one hand still on the stop switch cover, the other gripping the red lockout tag he had signed in black marker: "Unsafe rack condition. Do not operate aisle 7." He was 51 years old, broad-shouldered, careful in his movements, with close-cropped hair graying at the temples and work boots polished in the old-fashioned way. Not because anyone noticed, but because his father had taught him that a man who could not control his paycheck could still control his shoes. His name badge said Malcolm R. Sanitation Lead. Most people called him Mal when they needed something cleaned, Mr. Reed when they wanted to sound respectful, and Hey when they did not. Victor started toward him with 2 executives and the operations director following close behind. The mayor stayed on the stage. The cameras leaned in. The operations director, Janet Corwin, reached Malcolm first. She was a sharp woman with a tight bun, an overloaded tablet, and the haunted patience of someone who had been asked to make a warehouse look perfect with a staffing plan designed by people who had never unloaded a truck. "Malcolm," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" He looked past her toward the tall storage racks that ran like metal canyons down the center of the warehouse. "Stopping aisle 7. You cannot do that during launch. I already did." Victor arrived in time to hear that. He looked at Malcolm the way powerful men sometimes look at workers who choose the wrong moment to become visible. "Do you understand what you just interrupted?" "Yes, sir." "Then explain it." Malcolm nodded toward the rack line. "Baseplate on 7C is shifting. Anchor washers are bent. There is fresh metal dust under the front column, and a diagonal scrape across the guardrail that was not there last night." Victor stared at him. Janet's face changed, but only slightly. The chief automation engineer, a young man named Colin Voss, stepped forward. "We ran the structural inspection after installation. Rack capacity was certified. The automated reach trucks are locked to approved paths." Malcolm kept his voice even. "Machines follow approved paths until the floor is not where the drawing said it was." A few workers looked down. They knew that sentence. They had heard Malcolm say versions of it for years. Victor's jaw tightened. "Are you a rack engineer?" "No, sir." "Are you a safety officer?" "No, sir." "Then why are you shutting down a facility that feeds 80,000 families a month?" Malcolm looked at him without raising his chin. "Because a load does not care who signed the schedule." That was the first time Victor heard Malcolm's moral line. He heard it as disrespect. He heard it as a man trying to sound wise in front of cameras. He did not hear the father in it yet. He did not hear the old warehouse collapse in Tulsa that had taken Malcolm's older brother's leg before Malcolm was old enough to drive. He did not hear the years Malcolm had spent as a forklift operator before an injury and a company merger moved him from loading pallets to cleaning under them. He did not hear Earl Reed, Malcolm's father, sitting at a Formica kitchen table in 1989, tapping a pencil against a pay stub, and telling his sons that steel, debt, and pride all had one thing in common. They did not care what you meant, they only cared what you allowed. Victor only heard a janitor calling him careless. "Restart it," Victor said. Malcolm shook his head. The movement was small, the consequence was not. Around them, the warehouse waited. A supervisor whispered into a radio. Two dock workers stopped pushing a pallet jack and pretended not to watch. A woman from public relations stepped between the cameras and the line of sight, smiling too hard. The mayor glanced at her aide. Somewhere beyond the refrigerated doors, a truck driver tapped the steering wheel and checked the clock, because food route delays had a way of rolling downhill until they landed on people who were already hungry. Janet lowered her voice. "Malcolm, step aside. We can evaluate after the event." "No." Victor's eyes narrowed. "You are refusing a direct instruction." "I am refusing to send weight back into that aisle until someone qualified looks at the base." Colin laughed once, short and disbelieving. The system would have flagged it. Malcolm turned to him. "The system cannot smell hot dust. That was the clue. Not dramatic, not cinematic, not a siren, not an alarm, not a flashing warning screen. Hot dust. Fresh silver powder at the base of a rack column. A smell like ground metal after a pallet struck steel. A scrape line too low for a human-driven forklift, too high for a broom handle, and exactly where the new automated reach truck's side guard would pass if its sensor map had been calibrated from an old floor survey. Malcolm had noticed because he cleaned that floor at 2:30 every morning. He knew the warehouse by its underside. He knew which drains backed up after heavy rain, which freezer doors sweated when the gasket softened, which forklifts left black arcs on turns, which drivers cut corners, which rack guards got hit and reported, and which got hit by people who looked around, decided nobody had seen, and kept moving. He knew Aisle 7 because Aisle 7 was where the floor dipped, not enough for a guest to notice, enough for a mop bucket to roll if you left it unlocked, enough for a heavy reach truck to lean slightly when it entered from the south, enough for small forces to repeat until they became a problem. Competence is not always a certificate framed on a wall. Sometimes it is 9 years of bending down where others walk upright. "Security," Victor said. The word did not come out loud, but it traveled. A warehouse guard named Ben looked pained as he approached. He knew Malcolm. Everybody who worked nights knew Malcolm. Malcolm had found Ben's wedding ring once in the trash compactor room, after Ben took it off to clean grease from his hands. Malcolm had returned it in a paper cup and never told Ben's wife. "Mal," Ben said. Malcolm unhooked his employee badge from his shirt and held it out. That hurt more than he expected. The badge was not much. Plastic, scratched, with a photo taken after a 12-hour shift. But it opened the side door at 4 in the morning. It let him clock in. It meant rent, groceries, bus fare, and the envelope he slid under his father's apartment door every Friday, so the home aide could stay 2 extra hours. He thought of that envelope now. The temptation symbol. A cream-colored bank envelope in his locker with $400 inside, marked chair fund, though the chair was really for his father's broken recliner, the one that sagged so badly Earl slept tilted to one side. Malcolm had been saving for 6 months to buy a lift chair, so his father could stand without calling the neighbor. It was not life-saving. It was not urgent in the dramatic way people respect. It was dignity. It was the difference between a proud old man asking for help once a day instead of 5 times. If Malcolm lost this job, the chair would wait. The rent might not. His father's voice rose in his memory anyway. A load does not care who signed the schedule. Malcolm placed the badge in Ben's hand. "I am not leaving the building until the tag is logged," he said. Victor looked at Janet. "Is he threatening us?" "No, sir," Malcolm said. "I am protecting the record." The second time Victor heard the line under the line, he missed it again. The record mattered because Malcolm had learned what happens when warnings disappear. Years earlier, at a warehouse outside Tulsa, his older brother Darius had reported a leaning stack of imported tile to a shift lead who said, "We will fix it after rush." Somebody moved one more pallet. The rack did not collapse like buildings do in movies. It folded in sections. Steel buckled, boxes burst, men shouted, and when the noise stopped, Darius was alive but pinned and changed. The company called it an unfortunate material handling incident. The shift lead said no written warning had been filed. After that, Earl Reed taught both sons to write everything down. Put the truth where a broom cannot sweep it. That was Malcolm's family symbol. A small spiral notebook, black cover softened at the corners, carried in the front pocket of his uniform shirt. It was not a diary. It was times, dates, broken bolts, wet spots, pallet counts, repeated noises, missed pickups, truck numbers, and worker names written only when necessary. Proof, not gossip. When Malcolm handed over his badge, the notebook stayed in his pocket. "Escort him to the break room," Janet said, choosing each word like she was balancing dishes. "Do not remove him from the property yet." Victor turned on her. "Why not?" "Because he initiated a safety stop. If we remove him before logging it, that creates a different problem." Victor hated that she was right. The public relations woman whispered that the cameras were still watching. Victor stepped away, forced his face back into a shape the public could accept, and told the mayor there would be a brief technical pause. The mayor nodded with political gratitude, as if words could cool milk. Ben walked Malcolm down the side lane. "You sure?" Ben murmured. "No." Ben glanced at him. Malcolm gave the smallest shrug. "Sure is what people say before metal teaches them humility." Ben did not smile, but he almost did. In the break room, the television above the vending machine still played the local morning show segment about the grand opening. Victor Hale's face filled the screen beside footage of the bright warehouse floor. A caption called it a breakthrough in regional food security. Malcolm sat alone at the table nearest the emergency exit. His hands were steady until he looked at them. Then they started to shake. Not fear exactly. After 51 years, fear had become familiar enough to have different flavors. This was the sour kind. The kind that came from knowing the right choice might still cost the people who depended on you. His phone buzzed. "Dad." Malcolm let it ring twice, then answered. "You working?" Earl asked. "I am sitting." "That is not what I asked." Malcolm looked at the badge clipped now to Ben's belt outside the door. "I stopped the line." There was a pause. At 79, Earl Reed's voice had become thinner, but it still carried the dry weight of a man who had loaded trucks, driven city buses, buried a wife, raised 2 sons, and refused to let pain turn him mean. "Somebody hurt?" "Not yet." "Then why you sound like you already at the funeral?" Malcolm closed his eyes. "They may fire me." "For stopping foolishness?" "For stopping a billionaire's foolishness." Earl breathed through his nose. "That cost extra." Malcolm almost laughed. Then Earl said, "Did you write it down?" "Yes, sir." "Did you tag it?" "Yes, sir." "Then stand where you stood. A load does not care who signed the schedule." Third time. This time, the line held Malcolm together. He rubbed his thumb over the notebook in his pocket. Outside, the warehouse started arguing with itself. The first inspection took 20 minutes and proved nothing, which was exactly the problem. Colin Voss walked Aisle 7 with a tablet, 2 maintenance mechanics, and Janet. He looked at the rack column Malcolm had flagged. He photographed the base plate. He checked the visible anchors. He tugged on a guardrail with one hand and said it felt solid. The automated reach truck sat idle near the aisle mouth, white and blue, polished, branded with Hale Harvest's logo. It looked harmless when still. Most machines do. Colin opened the sensor log and showed Janet a neat green line. "No impact alerts," he said. "No path deviation. No weight limit breach." Janet crouched and touched the dust Malcolm had mentioned. It came away on her fingertip. "What is that?" "Could be from installation," Colin said. Installation was 3 weeks ago. Malcolm cleaned this lane last night. Colin stiffened. "With respect, are we really taking the sanitation guy's word over the system log?" Janet stood. "With respect, I have learned to take the word of people who notice things before dashboards do." That sentence would cost her later, too. They called a maintenance supervisor, who called the rack contractor, who did not answer because it was Friday, and the launch had been scheduled precisely to avoid weekend disruption. Victor demanded a decision. The trucks were waiting. The food bank partners had routes planned. News crews wanted a ribbon. The mayor had another event at noon. Colin proposed a limited restart. Bypass Aisle 7. Keep the conveyor moving. Use manual pickers for the delayed orders. The rack looked stable, he said. No visible lean beyond tolerance. No documented strike. No evidence of imminent failure. The word imminent did a lot of work in rooms where people wanted permission. Janet hesitated. Victor looked at the stopped line and saw waste. He saw headlines. He saw donors wondering whether his perfect system had failed before it began. He saw a janitor's hand on a switch becoming a story bigger than his speech. He did not see the 3 workers who would be sent into the aisle to pull emergency pallets by hand if they bypassed the robot. He did not see Keisha Bell, who had 2 kids and a mother in assisted living. He did not see Orrin Price, who was saving for welding school. He did not see Fei Liu, who had taken a warehouse job after the restaurant where she cooked closed during a rent hike. Victor's real estate arm had nothing to do with, but could have. He saw operations. That was how privileged blindness worked in decent people. Not always cruelty. Often distance. A person became a role. A role became a metric. A metric became a decision clean enough to sign. "Restart the unaffected lanes," Victor ordered. "Keeps 7 locked until we can say we addressed it." Janet turned sharply. "If 7 is locked, nobody goes into 7. Fine." Colin looked annoyed. "We will lose the frozen meal route." "Then we lose it," Janet said. Victor looked at her. "We are not losing anything because a custodian saw dust." The word custodian landed in Janet's face. She had been called worse by better men. Still, she did not move. "If you order manual picking in that aisle while a safety tag is active, put it in writing," she said. Victor stared at her. The public relations woman took one small step back, as if conflict might stain. Victor did not put it in writing. That should have been the end of the morning. It was not. Because delays create pressure. Pressure creates shortcuts. And shortcuts look almost reasonable to people who do not have to stand under the weight. At 11:17, while Victor gave a shortened speech at the front of the warehouse, and the cameras angled carefully away from the stopped conveyor, a shift lead named Rook made a choice. Rook was not evil. He was 32, ambitious, exhausted, and convinced that the people above him rewarded results and punished excuses. He had been told for weeks that launch day mattered. He had heard Victor ask about the frozen meal route. He had heard Colin say the rack looked stable. He had heard Janet say no manual picking, but he also knew Janet was trapped near the stage answering questions. 3 pallets of frozen meal kits sat in upper storage on Aisle 7, Bay C. A school district route needed them by 1. Rook told Keisha and Oren to pull only the lower substitute pallets from the aisle mouth. In and out, he said. Do not go deep. Keisha looked at the red lockout tag, clipped near the lane entry. I thought 7 was closed. It is closed to automation. That is not what the tag says. Rook's mouth tightened. You want to explain to 3 schools why food is late? Keisha did not. This is how failures travel, not as one bad person twirling a mustache, as 10 decent people passing pressure along until it lands on the one person with the least power to say no. In the break room, Malcolm heard the tone before the words. It was the sound of a pallet jack entering a lane it should not enter. A low rubber squeal, a metal rattle. The echo from aisle 7 was different because of the floor dip. He stood. Ben raised a hand. Malcolm pointed toward the wall. You hear that? I hear a warehouse. No, you hear a jack in 7. Ben listened. At first nothing, then a faint beep, then a woman's voice, too distant to understand. Malcolm moved past him. Mal, I am supposed to keep you here. You can keep up. They reached the aisle just as Keisha backed out with her pallet jack angled wrong because the floor dip pulled the load sideways. Oren stood behind her guiding the corner. Above them, the rack column at 7C gave a small sound. Not a crash, a ping. The kind of sound a bolt makes when it gives up one thread of its argument. Malcolm did not shout because shouting makes people jerk. He spoke like a man calling a child away from a curb. Keisha, stop pulling. Lower the forks. Step left. She froze. Oren looked up. Do not look up, Malcolm said. Step left now. They obeyed because Malcolm's voice had no panic in it. That was competence too. He knew panic could become motion and motion could become injury. The rack did not fall, it shifted. A top pallet slid maybe 4 inches, just enough for shrink wrap to stretch and snap across one corner. Boxes thumped against steel. A lower crossbeam bowed with a groan that rolled down the aisle and out into the launch ceremony like thunder heard from inside a building. Now everybody turned. Victor stopped mid-sentence. The mayor's smile vanished. The cameras swung. Janet ran. Colin ran faster, not toward the workers but toward the robot, as if the machine might be blamed if he reached it first. Malcolm walked Keisha and Oren backward until they were clear of the rack line. Only then did his own breathing change. Keisha's face had gone gray. Oren whispered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer and an apology at the same time. The pallet above them stayed where it was, damaged but held. That was the mercy. The warning was visible now. Even Victor could see it. The front rack column at 7C had twisted slightly at the base. One anchor hole had widened into an oval. The guardrail bore the diagonal scrape Malcolm had pointed out, and beneath it, silver dust lay in a tiny crescent on the sealed concrete like glitter from something ugly. The mid-story reversal was clean enough that every worker could say it by lunch. The janitor had not stopped food from leaving the warehouse. He had stopped workers from walking under a rack that was already failing. Victor reached the aisle breathing hard. What happened? Keisha pointed at the tag. We were told to pull substitute pallets. Janet looked at Rook. Rook swallowed. I thought the closure was for automated operation. Janet's voice went flat. The tag says do not operate aisle 7. Victor looked at the tag. For the first time, he actually read Malcolm's handwriting. Unsafe rack condition. Do not operate aisle 7. Date, time, signature. Under it, attached with a binder clip, was a copy of Malcolm's note from 3:48 that morning. Fresh metal dust under 7C front column. New diagonal scrape on guardrail. Baseplate washer deformation. Possible rack impact or floor movement. Request immediate inspection before load movement. Victor looked at Malcolm. Malcolm looked tired. Not triumphant, not angry. Tired in the way of a man who had been right too early to be believed, and now had to watch everyone discover the cost of being late. Victor opened his mouth. Before he could speak, Colin said, "This still does not prove system failure. Manual entry could have caused the shift." Malcolm turned slowly. Colin should have stopped there. He did not. You interfered with launch, left containment, and now you are contaminating the investigation with assumptions. Malcolm's face changed then, not much, but enough for Ben to step closer. I cleaned under that rack at 2:40 this morning, Malcolm said. The dust was fresh. The scrape was fresh. The washer was bent before your manual pick. If you want to know why the system did not flag it, check the robot bumper cover on Unit 3 and the path calibration from the old floor map. Colin's expression flickered. Tiny. But Malcolm saw it. So did Janet. Victor did not know what he had seen, only that the young engineer had suddenly become careful. "What does that mean?" Victor asked. Colin looked at his tablet. "It means he is speculating." "No," Janet said. "It means we check Unit 3. The robot sat near the charging bay. Its side bumper looked clean from standing height. Malcolm crouched. No one told him to stop this time. He pointed under the lower edge, where a narrow strip of blue paint had transferred onto the guardrail. The scrape on the rail was blue. Unit 3's bumper was blue. There was also a shallow dent in the plastic housing, buffed quickly, badly, as if someone had wiped it with a rag and hoped the morning lights would be kind. "Open the maintenance log," Janet said. Colin did not move. Victor looked at him. "Open it." Colin tapped. The log showed no impact, no fault, no deviation. Then Malcolm said, "Check manual override entries from Wednesday night." Colin's face lost color. That was the secret reveal. Not the whole truth yet. Enough to change the room. Unit 3 had struck the rack guard during an after-hours demonstration for investors 2 nights earlier. The impact had not been dramatic. The robot had clipped the guard while showing off a tight turn between aisles. The system registered a minor obstruction, but Colin had cleared the fault manually after checking the robot path. He had not filed a rack inspection because he did not think the impact was significant, and because the demonstration had already run long, and because Victor had been pleased for the first time all week. Then the maintenance log exported to the launch dashboard without the manual fault, because demonstration mode stored diagnostics locally unless uploaded. It was a small technical setting. It nearly became a human disaster. Victor listened as Colin explained, each sentence shrinking under its own weight. "I visually inspected the guard. Did you inspect the base plate? No. Did you report the impact? It was not an impact. It was contact." Janet laughed once, without humor. Keisha, still shaking, said, "Contact is what rich people call impact when the dent is on somebody else's side." Nobody expected that sentence from her. It stayed in the air. Victor looked from Keisha to Malcolm to the rack column. He was a man used to believing problems became solvable once he saw them. But this problem had been visible before he arrived. It had been seen by the worker he dismissed. It had been written down, tagged, spoken, refused, and still the pressure of his launch had almost moved people under steel. That was harder to file under mistake. A county safety inspector was called, then an outside structural rack engineer, then a refrigeration routing team. Then the food bank director, who arrived in a blue fleece vest with a face that said she had managed enough disasters to know the difference between inconvenience and catastrophe. The launch ended without ribbon. The news vans stayed. For 2 hours, nobody was allowed under the high storage racks in ASIL 6, 7, or 8. Pallets were stabilized with lift equipment operated from the safe side of the lane by certified staff. The engineer confirmed what Malcolm had feared. The rack was not collapsing in the dramatic sense, but one loaded bay had a compromised front column and anchor assembly. Continued load movement could have caused progressive failure, especially with manual pallet extraction or another robot pass. Serious danger, not exaggerated, real enough that the inspector's face went quiet. The food did not spoil because Janet made the call. Malcolm wished managers made more often. She contacted partner agencies, disclosed the delay, and rerouted shelf-stable boxes to the most urgent sites while cold trucks were moved to backup storage. It was messy. People were angry. Some deliveries went late, but late food can still feed someone. A buried worker cannot. At 2 o'clock, Malcolm was still without his badge. He sat on a stack of empty pallets near receiving, drinking vending machine coffee gone lukewarm. Keisha sat beside him, knees still bouncing. Oren stood nearby pretending to check his phone because he did not want anyone to see his hands shake. "You saved us," Keisha said. Malcolm shook his head. "I stopped a line. You stepped left. I would have kept pulling. You read the tag." "But I listened to Rook." Malcolm looked at her. Pressure makes people borrow other people's doubt. Do not keep it longer than you have to. Keisha nodded, but tears came anyway. He looked away to give her dignity. That was his way. Not every kindness needs a witness. Victor approached without the cameras this time. He had removed his suit jacket. His white shirt sleeves were rolled once at the cuffs, not enough to make him look like a worker, just enough to show he had finally gotten warm in the warehouse he owned. Mr. Reed. Malcolm stood because Earl had raised him to stand when spoken to, not because Victor deserved it more than anyone else. Yes, sir. I owe you an apology. Malcolm did not answer. Victor waited, uncomfortable with silence, because silence did not give him a role. I was wrong to dismiss your concern. Yes, sir. I should not have questioned your authority to stop the line. No, sir. Victor's eyebrows moved slightly. Malcolm was not making this easy. Good. An apology that needs comfort from the person harmed is not finished yet. Victor looked toward Azel 7. You prevented serious harm today. The tag prevented it. The notes helped. Keisha and Orrin listened. Janet held the line until the line got pushed around her. Victor absorbed the correction. I would like to make this right. Malcolm took the red lockout tag from his pocket. It was bent now from his grip. Make the system right. Victor nodded too quickly. We will conduct a full investigation. That is not the system. What do you mean? Malcolm looked at him then, really looked. He saw expensive shoes dusty at the edges. He saw a man who had probably given away more money than Malcolm would earn in 3 lifetimes, and still did not know the names of the people who made his generosity move. The system is why I had to choose between my job and their bodies. The system is why Rook thought late food was worse than tagged steel. The system is why an engineer could clear a fault because a demonstration mattered. The system is why the person who cleans under the rack can see a warning before daylight and still have to become a problem to be believed. Victor did not speak. Malcolm held out the red tag. You want to make it right? Make it so the next worker does not have to be brave to be heard. That was the dignity-preserving moment. No begging, no request for cash, no speech about how poor he was. Malcolm had a chair fund in his locker, rent due, and a father sleeping in a broken recliner. He said none of it. He did not turn pain into a sales pitch. He asked for repair where the failure lived. Victor took the tag. The cameras did not capture that. They were still outside, chasing quotes from the mayor. Good. Some moments are cleaner without applause. By 3:30, Malcolm was told he was suspended with pay pending review. Paid. That word mattered. Suspended. That word mattered too. Janet fought for the first and lost the second. Human resources needed process. Legal needed distance. Public relations needed time to decide whether Malcolm was a hero, a liability, or both. Safety needed statements. Operations needed blame to land somewhere useful. Malcolm cleaned out his locker because workers know paid suspensions can become unpaid endings once the cameras leave. Inside the locker was his spare uniform shirt, a thermos, aspirin, a photograph of his mother in her church hat, a pack of peppermint gum, and the cream-colored bank envelope marked Chair Fund. He counted it again even though he knew, $400. Not enough yet, maybe never enough now. He slipped the envelope into his jacket. At the bus stop outside the warehouse fence, Keisha came running. Mr. Malcolm. He turned. She held out his spiral notebook. You left it on the pallet. For one cold second, he thought of all the ways that notebook could have disappeared. Times, dates, notes, proof, the paper where truth could find it. He took it with both hands. Thank you. She nodded toward the warehouse. They are going to try to make this about one bad engineer. They will try. What do we do? Malcolm looked at the notebook. Then at the warehouse where workers were still moving around the broken day. We write down what happened while it is still today. Keisha stood straighter. That became the cliffhanger nobody on the news understood. The visible crisis had stopped. The real fight had just begun. That night, Malcolm rode the number 14 bus to his father's apartment with the chair envelope in his jacket and warehouse dust still under one fingernail. He could not make himself go home first. He needed to see Earl before fear had time to grow teeth. Earl lived on the second floor of a brick building near a laundromat and a tire shop. The stairs were too steep, the hallway smelled like boiled greens and old paint, and the elevator had been scheduled for modernization since before Malcolm's mother died. Earl refused to move because the apartment held 30 years of marriage inside its walls. His wife's recipe cards were still in the kitchen drawer. Her Bible still sat on the side table. Her winter coat still hung in the closet, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. Malcolm found his father in the recliner, tilted to the left, watching a game show with the volume too low to hear. "You look fired," Earl said. "Suspended. That is fired wearing a hat. Paid. That is better hat." Malcolm smiled despite himself and set groceries on the counter. Chicken thighs, rice, oranges, coffee. A pack of the ginger cookies Earl pretended not to like and finished in 2 days. Earl watched him move around the kitchen. "You stopped it?" "I stopped it." "You right?" "Yes." "Everybody alive?" "Yes." "Then sit down before you wear a trench in my floor." Malcolm sat. For a minute neither man spoke. This was how grief still lived between them. Darius in Tulsa, Malcolm's mother in the hospital, Earl's body betraying him one joint at a time. They did not always name pain, but they had learned to share the room with it. Malcolm pulled out the chair envelope and placed it on the table. Earl looked at it. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Look like you apologizing to money." "I may need it for rent." "You may. I was saving it for you." "I know what you were saving it for. I am old, not decorative." Malcolm looked down. Earl reached for the envelope, not to take it, but to push it back toward his son. "Listen to me. A chair is comfort. Rent is shelter. Pride is seasoning. Use what keeps the roof. I wanted you to stand without asking Mrs. Bell. I have been asking Mrs. Bell since she was 27 and pretty. It is too late to get shy now." Malcolm laughed then, a short broken sound that almost became something else. Earl let him have the dignity of stopping it. Then he said quieter, "Your brother called." Malcolm's face tightened. Darius lived in Oklahoma City, managed a small tool shop, and walked with a prosthetic leg he joked about only when he trusted the room. He and Malcolm spoke every few months, mostly about weather, repairs, and whether Earl was behaving. They did not talk about the collapse often because some memories are too heavy to lift for no purpose. "What did he say?" "Said he saw you on the news." "I was not on the news. You are on everybody's phone." Standing there looking stubborn as a parking meter. Malcolm rubbed his face. Earl continued. "He said, 'Tell Mal, thank you for stopping the rack before it got a leg.'" Malcolm looked away. There it was. The family symbol turning. Not the notebook, not the chair envelope. The old injury that had taught the line now answering back through another man's saved steps. Earl let silence hold it. Then he said, "You eat today? Coffee. Coffee is not food. Coffee is weather." Malcolm made rice. The next morning, the company's first public statement landed before sunrise. Hale Harvest Systems announced a temporary pause in one aisle after a routine safety concern was raised. During launch activities, no injuries occurred. The company praised its layered safety protocols and said an employee's vigilance contributed to an abundance of caution. Operations would resume after review. Malcolm read it twice on his phone at the kitchen table in his small apartment. Employees' vigilance, abundance of caution, routine concern. Every phrase had been washed until the truth smelled faintly of bleach. At 7:15, Keisha texted him. "They are saying the safety layers worked." At 7:21, Janet texted, "Do not respond publicly yet. Union will call." At 7:25, Ben texted a photo from the warehouse bulletin board. A temporary sign read, "Reminder, only authorized personnel may initiate equipment shutdown except in confirmed emergencies." Confirmed by whom, Malcolm thought. That was always the question. The investigation began the way investigations often begin, with everyone claiming to want honesty while measuring how much honesty they could afford. Legal interviewed Malcolm over video. Paula from the union sat beside him in the library meeting room because Malcolm's apartment internet cut out when it rained. A company attorney asked when he first observed the dust. Malcolm gave the time. She asked how he knew it was metal. He described the texture, color, and smell. She asked whether he had touched it without gloves. He said yes, then said he washed his hands before handling food contact. Surfaces because sanitation workers think about contamination before attorneys do. She asked whether he had personal issues with automation. No. Concerns about job displacement? Yes. Did that influence your decision? No. How can you be sure? Malcolm leaned toward the laptop camera. Because Keisha and Oren were not about to be displaced. They were about to be under a rack. Paula's pen stopped. The attorney moved on. They interviewed Colin. They interviewed Rook. They interviewed Janet. They interviewed Keisha and Oren separately. They pulled logs, photos, maintenance tickets, demonstration schedules, and security video. The evidence told a story no speech could beat. At 8:42 Wednesday night, during an investor demonstration, Robot Unit 3 entered ASIL 7 in demonstration mode. It clipped the guardrail at 7C. The contact did not trigger a central dashboard alert because the unit was operating in a local test environment. Colin cleared the obstruction after a visual check of the robot body, not the rack. No rack inspection was requested. The following morning, 2 supervisors noticed the guardrail looked scuffed, but assumed it had been hit by a manual forklift before installation. No one filed a report. Malcolm cleaned the aisle at 2:40 Friday morning, found new dust and deformation, reported to the night supervisor, and wrote the condition in his notebook after being told maintenance would circle back. By 6:10, with launch preparations underway, no one had inspected it. At 9:38, Malcolm stopped the line. Cause and effect. No miracle, no coincidence, just a chain of small decisions, each one defensible until placed beside the next. On the 3rd day of suspension, Malcolm received an email from Human Resources asking him to attend a meeting at headquarters. Janet called 10 minutes later. Do not go alone. I was not planning to. They may offer settlement language. I did not sue anybody. That does not stop settlement language from finding you. Malcolm sat with that. The cream-colored chair envelope lay on the kitchen counter beside his overdue electric bill. He had used $100 from it for groceries and Earl's aid. $300 remained. That was the harder choice. Not the big dramatic choice on camera, the quiet one after. He could accept whatever they offered, keep his job or a better one, let the company, call it a successful safety culture, and get back to surviving. That would not make him a coward. People with rent due are allowed to choose stability. People caring for parents are allowed to be tired. People who have already done the right thing are not obligated to become symbols. But Keisha's text stayed in his phone. What do we do? And his father's question stayed under his ribs. Did you write it down? At headquarters, the conference room windows looked over downtown. The table was long enough to make ordinary people feel like they had been placed at the wrong end of a decision. Victor was there, so were the general counsel, the head of operations, a safety consultant, Paula and Janet. Colin was not. Malcolm noticed that first. Victor looked different without cameras. Not smaller, more human, which was not the same as harmless. Mr. Reed. Victor said, "Thank you for coming." Malcolm nodded. The general counsel began with a summary of preliminary findings. There had been a failure to upload local robot diagnostics. There had been inadequate post-contact inspection. There had been ambiguity in authority around safety stops. The rack had been compromised but stabilized. No injuries occurred. Corrective action was underway. Malcolm listened. Then Victor said, "We would like you to return to work, with back pay maintained, no disciplinary record, and a promotion to Safety Observation Coordinator." The title sounded freshly invented. "What does that mean?" Malcolm asked. The operations head smiled. "You would document frontline concerns and escalate them through a new digital reporting channel." "Can I stop a line?" The smile weakened. "In accordance with policy." "Can any worker stop a line?" The room shifted. Victor answered this time. "That is under review." Malcolm looked at the red lockout tag in front of Victor. Someone had preserved it in a plastic evidence sleeve. "Then the job is not the repair." The general counsel folded her hands. "Mr. Sareed, the offer is not intended to be a comprehensive safety program. It is recognition of your contribution." "My contribution was stopping work." "Yes, then recognize the right to stop work. Paula's eyes flicked toward him, proud and worried. Victor leaned back. "What exactly are you asking for?" Malcolm had written it down because he knew nerves make truth slippery. He opened his notebook. 1. Every worker, including sanitation, temp labor, drivers, and contractors, has clear stop work authority for visible safety hazards without retaliation. 2. Any automation demonstration fault, even in test mode, uploads to the central log before operations resume. 3. Any rack or guard contact requires a documented physical inspection by someone qualified, not only a robot reset. 4. No manual picking in a tagged aisle. 5. Safety tags stay visible in the system and physically at the lane until cleared by maintenance and operations together. 6. Near-miss reports get posted monthly without names, so people can learn from what almost happened. 7. A worker safety council with hourly workers from each shift, and those workers get paid time to inspect and report. 8. You stop calling it an abundance of caution and say what failed. The room was silent. Then the operations head said, "That is a lot." Malcolm closed the notebook. So was the rack. Victor looked at him for a long moment. There are people who apologize because they are cornered, and people who repair because they finally understand the corner was built by their own hands. Victor was not all the way to the second kind yet, but he had taken one step. "You understand," Victor said slowly, "that a public admission increases legal exposure." Malcolm nodded. "Steel already exposed you." Janet coughed once into her hand. It might have been a laugh. The general counsel did not appreciate it. Victor stood and walked to the window. Down below, traffic moved in steady lines. Trucks, buses, delivery vans, private cars. Systems inside systems. Every one of them trusted that invisible workers had tightened bolts, checked brakes, painted lines, cleaned spills, filed permits, trained drivers, and stopped what needed stopping. He thought of his father. Not often. Victor did not like to. Arthur Hale had owned 2 small grocery stores in Ohio before national chains crushed his margins. He was not poor in the romantic way public speeches like. He was proud, difficult, suspicious of help, and sometimes too hard on the people who loved him. But he had one rule in the store. If the stockroom ladder was broken, nobody climbed it, not even during holiday rush. "Customers can wait," Arthur used to say. Gravity does not negotiate. Victor had not thought of that line in years. It sounded uncomfortably like Malcolm's. A load does not care who signed the schedule. He turned back. "I will not agree to every word in this room without review." Malcolm's face did not move. "But I will agree publicly that the safety stop was valid, that our process failed, and that we are implementing worker stop authority across this facility immediately while broader policy is negotiated." The general counsel started to speak. Victor held up one hand, "And Malcolm Reed will be part of that negotiation, if he chooses. Paid time, no loss of position, no discipline." Malcolm looked at Paula. Paula gave a tiny nod that meant, "Take the doorway, keep pushing on the door." Malcolm looked back at Victor. "Keisha, Oren, night shift, sanitation, drivers, temps, they need seats too." Victor nodded once. "Then bring chairs." The phrase hit Malcolm in the chest because of the envelope on his counter. Victor did not know. That made it better somehow. Not a gift, not rescue, just room. The public statement came at 4 that afternoon. This time, Victor read it himself in front of the warehouse. Without the mayor, without the banner, without the ribbon. He said the company had failed to treat a worker's observation with the urgency it deserved. He said an automation demonstration fault had not been escalated properly. He said a rack contact should have triggered immediate inspection. He said Malcolm Reed's safety stop was valid and likely prevented serious injury. He announced temporary suspension of high bay automation in the facility, independent review of all rack systems, stop work authority for every worker, and a paid hourly safety council. He did not call Malcolm a hero. Malcolm had asked him not to. Hero can become a cage. Heroes are praised, then ignored, then blamed for not saving everyone next time. Worker was enough, competent worker, trusted worker. The statement did not fix everything. Statements rarely do. Colin resigned before the investigation ended, though the final report made clear the failure was organizational, not one man's mistake. Rook was disciplined but not fired after Keisha and Malcolm both said pressure from launch targets shaped his bad decision. Janet kept her job, though her relationship with headquarters cooled for months. The rack contractor found 2 other base plates with early deformation in adjacent lanes. The old floor survey had indeed missed a low section where concrete had settled near a drain line. Automated path maps were corrected. Demonstration mode was rewritten so local faults could not vanish from central logs. The ribbon was never cut. The warehouse reopened aisle by aisle under a new rule printed in plain language on signs at every entrance. If you see a serious hazard, stop work, report it. You will not be punished for protecting people. Under the English were Spanish, Vietnamese, Arabic, and Somali translations because food warehouses are held together by people whose first languages often get treated as afterthoughts until safety needs them. Malcolm returned 2 weeks later. His badge worked. That small green light at the side door nearly undid him. He stood there at 4:12 in the morning, lunchbox in hand, waiting for the click. When it came, he did not move for a second. He thought of all the workers whose badges stopped working without ceremony. A plastic door refusing a person who still has bills, still has hands, still has a name. Then he stepped inside. The warehouse smelled the same and different. Same cold air, same cardboard, same citrus from spilled oranges near produce, same machine oil under the loading dock smell. But there were new yellow floor markings around rack bases, new inspection mirrors mounted on carts, new tag stations at aisle entrances, new tablets with a simple hazard report form that did not require a supervisor login, new boards showing near misses from the previous week, not to shame but to teach. The first one listed was AIL-7 rack contact, missed escalation, worker safety stop. Malcolm read it twice, not because he needed credit, because the words had stayed honest. Keisha walked up beside him with 2 coffees. Figured you would come early. I always come early. Now everybody knows why. He took the coffee. Everybody knows what happened. That is not the same. She nodded toward the board. You think it lasts? Malcolm sipped. Only if we keep making it inconvenient to forget. That became his work for the next 6 months. Not glamorous, not viral, not the kind of thing people make statues for. He attended safety council meetings with Keisha from day shift, Oren from outbound, a driver named Sal, a temp worker named Farah, a freezer picker named Luis, a mechanic named Rhonda, and one rotating supervisor who was not allowed to speak first. They walked aisles with flashlights and inspection cards. They argued about reporting forms. They made management add a hazard-corrected column because workers had seen too many complaint boxes become decorative furniture. They pushed for paid translation time. They made sure temp workers got training before touching equipment, not after their first mistake. They also learned how systems resist repair. At the first council meeting, the operations head presented a 36-slide deck about safety culture. Malcolm listened for 7 minutes, then raised his hand. Can we walk the floor instead? The man looked offended. Victor, sitting in the back, said, walk the floor. So they did. On the floor, the slides became real. A freezer door that blocked a mirror when propped open. A charging cable stretched across a walking path. Labels printed too small for older workers to read. Without stopping equipment. A Spanish translation that turned near miss into words meaning almost lost, which made workers think they would be blamed. A sanitizer station placed behind stacked pallets where nobody could reach it during rush. None of these were dramatic. All of them mattered. Practical repair often looks boring until the day it saves someone. Victor kept showing up, which annoyed some executives more than open hostility would have. At first, workers stiffened when he walked the floor. Then they realized he was not there to give speeches. He asked questions. He wrote answers down. He got corrected. Once he used the word associate, and Farah said, "You mean worker?" He blinked, then said, "Worker." She nodded, and they moved on. He was not transformed into a saint. That would have been too easy. He still liked metrics. He still moved through rooms with the expectation that doors would open. He still sometimes asked for impossible timelines and needed Janet to say no with her whole face. but he learned to recognize the moment when confidence became distance. He learned that seeing the floor from a tour route was not the same as seeing it from a mop handle at 3 in the morning. He learned Malcolm's name without needing the badge. The chair envelope stayed on Malcolm's kitchen counter through all of it. Bills took from it, overtime fed it, then bills took again. One Friday in July, Victor asked Malcolm to stay after a council meeting. Malcolm braced himself. Private conversations with powerful people often arrived, wrapped gratitude, and left behind obligations. "I heard your father was a warehouse man," Victor said. Malcolm's face closed. "Who told you that?" "Janet mentioned your family had experience after an incident." "Nothing personal." "Everything is personal when it is your family," Malcolm thought. Victor seemed to sense the line. "I am sorry. I should not have asked that way." "No, you should not have." There it was again. A chance for Victor to be offended and for Malcolm to be punished for not softening truth. Victor took the harder road. "You are right." Malcolm waited. "My father owned grocery stores," Victor said. "He had a rule about broken ladders. I forgot it until you stopped the line." Malcolm did not rescue him from the silence. Victor continued. "We are creating a training module for stop work authority, not a polished corporate video, real stories. Workers explaining what they see. I would like to include your line about a load not caring who signed the schedule." "No?" Victor looked surprised. Malcolm said, "That line is my father's. It came from my brother's injury. It is not a slogan." Victor nodded slowly. "Understood. You can teach the principle, do not package my family." That was another dignity-preserving moment. The powerful person did not get to turn pain into branding because he had learned something. Victor accepted it. The training module opened with a different sentence, written by the Safety Council together. "Work stops when people are in danger. No target outranks a life." That sentence went on posters, badges, and new hire forms. It was not as poetic. Good. Policy should not need poetry to be obeyed. In August, Earl's recliner finally broke with a sound like a wooden cough. Malcolm found him half standing, half trapped, angry enough to refuse help, and scared enough to accept it after only 2 curses. That night, Malcolm sat on the edge of his father's bed and admitted the chair fund was short. Earl stared at the ceiling. "I spent 40 years lifting things I should have asked help to lift. Now my son thinks I need a throne. You need a chair that does not eat you. That chair and I had an understanding. It broke the treaty." Earl laughed, then winced. Malcolm looked at his hands. "I am sorry." Earl turned his head. "For what?" "I keep choosing work." "No," Earl said. "You keep choosing people. Work is just where they hide the test." Malcolm swallowed. The next week, the Safety Council voted on its first use of a new worker improvement fund. Money created not as charity, but as part of the company's near-miss settlement with the workforce. The fund was for safety and dignity improvements proposed by hourly workers. Better gloves, anti-fatigue mats, translation pay, emergency ride-home vouchers after mandatory overtime, chairs in break rooms that did not collapse under heavier workers, step stools rated for real use, not office decoration. Keisha proposed adding home medical equipment grants for workers and immediate family when job schedules or injuries created caregiving strain. The room debated whether that belonged in a workplace safety fund. Farah said caregiving fatigue affected alertness. Rhonda said workers came in exhausted because home was not built for bodies that hurt. Sal said a man who slept badly because his father was stuck in a chair was not safer on a warehouse floor. Malcolm said nothing. He knew they were talking about him. He also knew they were talking about more than him. The policy passed. Not for Malcolm. Because the council made the case that safety does not stop at the time clock when exhaustion walks back in wearing work boots. Malcolm applied like everyone else. 1 page. No special treatment. Earl received a lift chair in September. When it arrived, Earl refused to look impressed. The delivery men set it near the window. It was brown, sturdy, plain, with a side pocket for the remote and enough lift to bring Earl to his feet without making him feel like a sack of laundry. He sat. He rose. He sat again. Then he said, "It will do." For Earl Reed, that was a standing ovation. Malcolm kept the empty cream-colored envelope. He did not know why at first. Then he folded it and placed it inside his black notebook beside the old red tag copy Janet had given him after the investigation closed. Temptation symbol, family symbol, sacrifice symbol, not trophies. Reminders. The payoff came 1 year later, on a Thursday morning without cameras. The warehouse had been running under the new safety system for 11 months. Near-miss reports had increased at first, which frightened executives until Janet explained that silence had been the old metric, not safety. Actual injuries dropped, equipment damage dropped. Missed deliveries rose slightly during the first quarter, then fell after routing plans included realistic inspection time. Hale Harvest spent more money on maintenance and training. Investors complained. Victor told them food moved faster when workers were not afraid to tell the truth. It was the first time that slogan had meant anything. At 6:23 in the morning, a temp worker named Amadou stopped the freezer line. He was 24, quiet, 2 weeks into the job, and still learning where everything belonged. He noticed frost building around the bottom of a freezer door where warm air should not have entered. He had seen the new training. He had heard Malcolm explain that a small sign repeated long enough can become a big event. He hit stop, tagged the area, and called maintenance. The supervisor on duty started to say the route was urgent. Keisha, now assistant shift lead, looked at him. The tag is active. That ended it. Maintenance found the door heater circuit failing and water beginning to freeze in a thin sheet across the exit path. Not dramatic yet, not a headline. Just slick enough that a worker pulling a heavy pallet could have gone down hard in a freezer lane where cold turns small injuries stubborn. They fixed it before anyone fell. At the safety board that afternoon, Malcolm watched Amadou write the near miss in careful block letters. Frost at freezer exit. Stopped line, heater repair completed. No injury. Amadou looked embarrassed by the attention. Malcolm stepped beside him. You did the job. I stopped everybody. You stopped the floor from choosing. Amadou smiled a little. On the table below the board sat a basket of new red lockout tags. Bright, clean, ready. Malcolm picked one up. The color still pulled him back to launch day, to Victor's anger, to the badge leaving his shirt, to Keisha stepping left under steel. But the tag felt different. Now less like a weapon, more like a tool. Victor walked up quietly. He wore a hard hat with scuffs now, real ones, not costume scuffs. Mr. Reed, Mr. Hale. Victor looked at the board. Amadou stopped the freezer line. He did. Supervisor accepted it. Keisha reminded him. Victor nodded. Good. They stood there together, not friends exactly, not equals in the way money makes difficult, but connected by a truth neither of them could unlearn. Victor reached into his jacket and took out a small object. A brass whistle, dull with age. Malcolm's body went still. My father used this in his first store, Victor said, before intercoms. If something broke in the stockroom, he blew it and everyone stopped moving until they knew why. He held it out, then hesitated. I am not giving it to you. I realized that would be strange. Malcolm looked at him. Victor smiled at himself. I am learning. He placed the whistles on the shelf below the safety board instead. Maybe it belongs here. Malcolm looked at the brass whistle. He thought of Earl's line, Darius's leg, Keisha's gray face, the red tag, the chair envelope, the badge clicking green, Amadou's careful handwriting. All the small proofs placed where truth could find them. He touched the old notebook in his pocket. Then he took out the cream-colored envelope, the one that had once held chair, money, now flattened and soft from months between pages. He folded a copy of the new stop work policy and slid it inside. On the front where chair fund had been written, he added 3 words. For the floor, he placed it beside the whistle. Victor read the words but did not ask. Good. Some symbols do not need translation. Months later, a group of new hires stood in ASL 7 for safety orientation. The rack had been rebuilt. The concrete had been leveled and marked. The guardrail was painted yellow and at its base was a small clear plate, not a plaque with Malcolm's name, because he had refused that, but a simple label the Safety Council approved. Look low, speak early, stop work. Malcolm stood in front of them with a broom in one hand and a red tag in the other. He did not tell the story like legend. He told it like work. He showed them how to notice fresh dust, bent guards, blocked exits, wet floors, bad labels, tired coworkers, pressure disguised as urgency, and silence pretending to be agreement. He told them supervisors had responsibilities and workers had rights. He told them no delivery target, no launch, no donor, no executive, no camera, and no schedule could make steel lighter than it was. Then he pointed to the floor. Most warnings do not start above your head, he said. They start where people stopped looking. A young worker raised her hand. What if we are wrong? Malcolm nodded. It was the right question. Then we learn. We restart. Maybe somebody complains. But if you are right and say nothing, the floor keeps the receipt. He let that settle. Not fake deep. Practical. The floor always keeps the receipt. At the end of the shift, Malcolm took the bus to Earl's apartment. His father was in the new chair by the window, one hand resting on the remote, like he had commanded the thing personally into existence. How was the floor? Earl asked. Still there. That is a good day. Malcolm placed a copy of the new hire card on the side table. Earl put on his glasses and read it slowly. Work stops when people are in danger. No target outranks a life. He nodded. Your mama would have liked that. Malcolm looked toward the kitchen where her recipe cards still sat in the drawer. She would have said it needed a comma. She did love a comma. They sat together as evening moved across the window. Below, buses sighed at the curb. Someone carried laundry. A child dragged a backpack over the sidewalk. A delivery truck double-parked with flashers blinking. The city kept moving because invisible people kept deciding, every hour, whether to do the careful thing when careless would be faster. Malcolm reached into his pocket and felt his notebook. Inside were new notes from the day. A loose dock bumper at door 12. A blocked eyewash station near battery charging. A temp worker who needed the Spanish training card. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worthy of cameras. Exactly the kind of details that decide whether tomorrow becomes ordinary or tragic. Earl watched him. You still writing things down? Yes, sir. Good. The old man leaned back, the chair lifting his legs gently, with no one needing to pull him up or push him down. A quiet dignity, a repaired system. A red tag waiting at every aisle. And a worker who did not become powerful, did not become rich, did not become famous in any way that mattered to him, but changed the rules of a place because he refused to let truth stay under the dust. So the next time a warehouse opens on camera, or a hospital hallway shines before inspection, or a hotel lobby sparkles while housekeeping carts squeak behind closed doors, maybe the question is not who cut the ribbon. Maybe the question is, who has been looking low enough to keep everyone standing?